A Los Angeles-based artist who critically investigates questions of power and representation within contemporary political, social, and cultural landscapes. She is the founder of the Pocho Research Society of Erased and Invisible History, an ongoing collaborative project that engages the subject of history through critical inquiry and artistic processes. Through collaborations with specific communities, she finds strategies of making invisible histories visible through projects that result in multimedia installations, video, photographic work, publications, and public interventions. In a recent project, Mural Remix, a solo exhibition that was part of the Getty's PST initiative, she took the role of a performative archivist to expand on existing understandings of 1970s Chicano murals. As an artist, entering the archive, she occupies the positions normally held by historians, curators, and scholars to interrogate the power embedded in the act of history making. By gathering, slicing, blowing up, and remixing archival materials, she explores history as an elastic space of practice, one that can be shaped, stretched, and expanded while making visible the processes in which the dominant narratives are created. Her book, the Pocho Research Society's Field Guide to Erased and Invisible Histories, is now available through the University of Washington Press. It was published in 2011. My class earlier today had the honor of Sandra coming in and just talking candidly about her practice, and that was a great experience for my seminar class. But Sandra's also in town through Sunday, and she's working with Marn. Sarah Delighten has set up a really interesting program for Sandra, where she's speaking at the Latino Arts Center on, Friday night, and she's doing studio visits with a number of artists, some of whom I see in the audience tonight on Saturday. So she has a real great chance to really get to know Milwaukee a little better and dialogue with people inside the university and outside. So without further ado, let me welcome Sandra de la Loza. The volume's good in the back, right? And speakers? Good, thanks.
All right, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me well? Yes? In the back? Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Milwaukee, for this warm welcome. I think this is definitely the coldest weather I've ever been to. Really want to give thanks to Nicholas for inviting me here and for his support over the years. I prepared a talk for you entitled Art as a Living Practice. And this talk really comes out of a long period of self-reflection. But quickly, before I jump into that, I want to take a picture and prove that people actually come and hear me speak. All right. So this talk comes out of a long period of self-reflection, spurred by very intense life events. In the last 4 years, I've experienced two deaths that were very close to me. My mother passed away 4 years ago, and then I have a brother who passed away this summer. That kind of coincided with me just realizing, like, wow, I'm fully middle-aged. I also teach part-time, and I'm realizing sometimes when I lecture that some of my references happened before some of my students were even born. So this kind of really spurred questions about, why did I choose this path of being an artist? Especially at a point where it's, a really difficult path. On one level, just economically, as an adjunct professor and as an artist, there is no security for the future. There is no. I struggled for just basics like health insurance Luckily, I have cheap rent, but I'm also living in a city in which it's becoming increasingly more difficult to live because it's increasingly more expensive. So this talk is really a reflection on my own journey as an artist. And through those reflections, the places and points where during this kind of moment of self-reflection, became clear about where I root myself. So, the title, Art as a Living Practice, I wanted to think of my practice itself as something living. My practice as something that is dynamic, that's alive, that's shifting, that's always reforming, always growing, and always morphing. I'm not a studio artist, although I do work that can be called studio art, and I don't do just one thing. I'm constantly playing with new forms and asking new questions. And also, I don't really see art as an end game in itself. My goals aren't really necessarily to enter the upper echelons of the art world and be an international artist who circulates globally and participates in all the biennales or fancy galleries. I'm much more interested in how art can enhance how I live. So this kind of period of reflection also helped me be more clearly name the value, what I value in art, and what my goals are of success. I also use the term art as a living practice and think of living as embodying. Seeing my art as a practice that shapes who I am, how I live, and what I build to live in. So with that, I want to share my journey. I root my journey as an artist probably kind of beginning maybe when I was about your age. In the late 80s, I went to UC Berkeley as a freshman. Went to Berkeley, was a fish out of water, and my entrance into the university also coincided with some very intense life events. I'm the youngest of 6. I grew up in Los Angeles, first generation college student. My oldest brothers are 20 years older than me. My oldest brother overdosed 6 months before I went to Berkeley. And I arrived at Berkeley like a raw wound. And it really kind of spurred a journey in which I really kind of questioned everything. And my time at Berkeley really helped that process. When I was at Berkeley, my first semester, there are a couple of pivotal events that really helped guide my journey. And one was going to my first poetry reading, and it was by the poet Mary Baraka, who actually recently passed away. I think it was last year he passed away. An amazing poet, Leroy Jones, in the 50s, and he changed his name to Mary Baraka. But amazing thinker, writer, activist, and that poetry reading really opened my eyes to the possibilities of language. It was really powerful for me to see someone creating such beauty and also uttering such profound thoughts and ideas from his language, from a Black vernacular. At Berkeley also, my first year, I took writing classes with a writer named Shuri Moraga. She was a writer who was really active in what might be called the efforts to create and shape and define a third world feminist theory. She was the editor of a book called This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color. And I was really fortunate enough to take writing classes with her. And I think one thing I took from her was, and I learned from her, and I think I carry with me today, was that education and also the process of writing can be a place where you can find and create the language to begin to utter what has not been spoken. She encouraged us as young students to begin writing from the places where and to begin to name the things that we didn't have language to name, and to really struggle to name those hidden spaces. So also during my undergraduate years, I had the great pleasure of studying abroad in Mexico City. Right before I went to Mexico City, I received my first camera. My mother bought me a 35mm camera, and I took a black and white photo class at community college. Been shooting ever since. My time in Mexico, I documented my whole journey. Mexico City was a really transformative moment in my life. I think on one level it was just a great gift to kind of go back to the motherland, to a country that I had roots in, but never knew. I was born and raised in LA, but I'm second generation Mexican-American. Studying in Mexico City allowed me to understand myself through across geography, across time, across history. But in Mexico, I was also fed what kind of had been repressed and demeaned in the United States, my Mexican identity, Mexican culture. Mexico City was also a place, I kind of see that period as a period of incubation. A period in which I was fed spiritually, culturally, intellectually. And within that space, me and a number of other Chicano students who were part of the UC Study Abroad program got to travel, got to touch, reroot ourselves, and also imagine what we were going to do with our knowledge, imagine what we could do. So actually this photo is a photo of me when I was 20 years old, and with it are two people who were great friends of mine. One is Marco Fireball on the left, who actually became an assemblyman in California and was, now he's kind of iconic. Unfortunately, he passed away about, I think, 6 years ago, but he's iconic for DreamAct students. He was the only assemblyman who was not born in the United States. He was born in Tijuana. And he passed legislation that made community colleges accessible to undocumented youth. So undocumented youth did not have to pay out-of-state fees. Another person is Elias Serna, who also returned to his home when he graduated from Berkeley, and has been active in his small, increasingly smaller working class community of Santa Monica. Also combines art and activism, is co-founded a theater group called Chicano Secret Service, and is actually working on his PhD in literature right now. But I think most importantly, I want to emphasize that Mexico, that time away from home, gave me the space to dream and to imagine. And that's something that's fueled my work, and I think that when I need to, I take a break and I try to get back in touch with. And that also kind of fuels like the envisioning of new work, new projects. I came home, back to LA, returned to LA in 1992, 3 weeks after the LA uprising or riots that were spurred by a verdict in which policemen who had beat Rodney King were acquitted by an all-white jury. When I left to Berkeley, it coincided with dramatic shifts that were happening nationally, but also particularly in LA. And one of those shifts was what's now known as a crack epidemic. Crack flooded the streets of Los Angeles. Many people I had grew up with. I was one of the few who had the opportunity to go to university. I went to public schools with 60% dropout rates. So I saw my generation decimated. There was a surge of street violence, coupled with living in Los Angeles. Our city gets the images of our city and narratives of our city get exported very frequently through Hollywood films. So a whole new genre of Hollywood films, these gang exploitation films, became popular, and the image of certain neighborhoods and areas in Los Angeles was an image was produced that was totally distorted and really kind of dehumanized and criminalized my generation. At the same time, there are huge structural shifts. In the 80s, LA lost hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs, like what was happening in many parts of the country at that time. That economy was actually replaced by what we now call a prison industrial complex. So an investment in the creation of prisons, and thus also the incarceration of many people. So that's the context in which my generation kind of came out, left high school, and came into the world. And that definitely fueled a lot of my early work. So I came back to LA in '92 and subsequently participated in a number of collectively run artist and activist spaces. I'm going to read you a short excerpt, something I wrote. Returning to LA, I found an ever-expanding group of fellow dreamers, working-class kids, artists, musicians, activists, teatristas, recent college grads, high school dropouts, intent on exploring the imaginative, social, and organizing potential of art and culture to impact our own communities. For the next 8 years, I became a participant, visitor, organizer, artist, documenter at a variety of collectively run art and activist spaces in storefronts, bars, vacated industrial buildings, and office spaces. So I'm going to show you a slideshow of some of my early photography, and it's coupled with some photos that I collected for an archival project called Collective Synapse. And as I show you that slideshow, I'm going to be reading excerpts from an archive I collected on one of these spaces called the Peace and Justice Center. So in the photo slideshow, you also see some of my early photography. I was working a lot with self-portraits or performative portraiture, in which I take images of myself or ask a friend to sit in and project images onto their bodies. And then there'll be some documentary work. The Peace and Justice Center was a space born from a labor dispute between youth workers who were hired by a nonprofit organization called the LA Conservation Corps. And that labor dispute escalated to a sit-in by the youth. They occupied the offices of that organization. And through negotiations, that organization left the building, and those youth were granted an entire building near downtown LA for a year. And they created an amazing art space. so with that, I will begin. Snapshot of the Peace and Justice Center, Rufang Test. Flyer. In the beginning, the children of Earth were born free. Today, government registers, labels, identifies you, Generation X. Sunday, September 1st, Labor Day weekend, the children, spelled with an X, will reign free once again. Photo caption, LA Times article, mid-March 1995. Jobs protest. Carmela Alvarez, above, and about 20 other workers have occupied a Los Angeles Conservation Corps office downtown, complaining that its jobs demean minority workers. Flyer, Lunati Lounge. Every Thursday at the Lunati Lounge, the Peace and Justice crew unfolds the beauty of the soul through poetry and meditation. The Lunati Lounge is a place where questers, outcasts, philosophers, and abstract minds can come together to give and receive positive energy. Formed from indigenous roots, blending with modern practices. Youth workers demand as of 3/12/95. Number 1, that youth should have the power to have a voice, to coordinate, to create, to have choices, and to lead in organizing different projects. Flyer, benefit concert to open a revolutionary organizing center. Titanium, Los Hijos de Pancho, Víctimas del 187, Bandera, Todos Somos Marcos. Youth workers demand number 2, the establishment of the Peace and Justice Youth Center as a tenant and occupant of lease at 1220 West 4th Street, Los Angeles, California, 90017. The center is dedicated to the spiritual, cultural, and political development of, for, and by youth. LA Times article, March 22nd, 1995. Strike at Jobs Program. LA Conservation Corps workers stage sit-in, demand benefits and better pay. Flyer, quest. One love is that all love, all as one. Press release, Wednesday, March 15th, 1995. The Los Angeles Conservation Corps Executive Director had promised to bring other directors involved with the incident to meet with the youth workers this afternoon on the steps of LA City Hall, but failed to show up. The Los Angeles Conservation Corps receives over $6.5 million in federal, state, and local taxpayer monies to employ and train over 2,000 youth workers a year. While the Corps requests these monies to train and employ the youth, many of the youth feel that they have been given blank promises. Flyer, poetry, explosion of consciousness, manifesting love and unity through word alchemy. And music, Estrella Revolution, rise and climb. Turntables with open mic, so bring your desire. This and every Friday with new art mutations. Article in the Revolutionary Worker, March 26, 1995. They call us Generation X because we don't have a future. Enough of that. We are in 1995, around the corner from 2000. These are times of change. Things are changing. We ourselves are changing things in a positive way, says James, a 20-year-old black youth. Flyer, Unity Quest 1, a gathering of the tribes, featuring the Psychedelic Orchestra. Flyer, Unity Quest 3, featuring live bands, Olin, The Blues Experiment, Resistant Militia, Aztec Generation, Rice and Beans, Black Eyed Peas, Freak Daddy. Youth workers demand number 5, that all of the training and educational programs that were promised are made available to us. Flyer, weekly menu, food for consciousness, quest beyond realms of illusions, quest into reality of true self. Thank you, come again. Youth workers demand number 12, investigation of LACC's inability to provide promises and the services and trainings and funding proposals that they have secured. Flyer back, Foundation Collective. Shoutouts and special invites. The Foundation Poets, UCLA Samahang, Hello Hello Society, Tribal Pinoy, Psycho Click, Rhyme Stockas, Devious Network, Foot Soldiers, Buckwheat, Rakas, Black Eyed Peas, formerly Atban Land, Whippersnappers, Beat Junkies, United Youth on the Move, Filipino AIDS Task Force, All the Peeps Down with the West Coast Hip Hop Underground, and U2, Peace and Adobe Grease. Youth Workers Demand number 7, the delivery of benefits such as medical health care, child care, and bus fare. This event is dedicated to those with a soul and love for the word, elevating to a higher level of critical consciousness through edutainment and individual collective resistance to reactionary and regressive events, i.e. Mumiabu Jamal, affirmative action, 187, immigrant scapegoating, bashing, P.D. Wilson, the Contract on America, and other pertinent issues. If you don't know, you better ask somebody. Talk minus action equals 0. I consider this time between undergrad and grad school participating in artist and activist spaces as my art school outside of art school. And if I name what I learned and what I gained from it, I'd say that one, it was just a great experiment of theory and praxis. So as we created these centers, as we acted, organized events, created art, cleaned up after a gig, developed structures to work collectively. Through that, we theorized, we politicized ourselves. Our theory informed our actions, and then our actions again informed our theory. So there was definitely a dialectical process. 2, I learned that we can create our own structures. We can create our own structures for learning, for producing culture, for distributing information, our own microeconomies, our own structures for living. 3, I learned that we can be producers of our own knowledge. We can theorize, that we can learn from each other, and we have knowledge amongst ourselves that can be shared and distributed. And that through certain tools that we could name our reality, and also we can name ourselves. And again, I learned to dream and imagine. And I think in this way, in a very, very harsh moment in LA history, you know, where, like, I think for different communities, the reality of being a youth was either to get sucked into a drug world or gang world or leave, escape. We held our ground, and we created another space, and we created other alternatives. So in early 2000s, I returned to school, and I decided to pursue an MFA in photography. So I'm going to show you some of my photo-based work. I wanted to go back to school to have the concentration of time and energy to pursue certain questions and ideas I have. It's really, for me, a very important word, very important concept was the idea of hegemony. One really influential book was a book written by Edward Said called Culture and Imperialism, and he talks about how culture can be a liberating tool, but also how culture can be a tool of the colonizer, a tool that can be used to legitimize and reinforce the existing social relations. He looks specifically at the colonization of Africa. and looks at how culture was a colonial tool, but then also looked at African literature and what African literature contributed to African independence movements and struggles for liberation. So I began by doing looking at family photos. I was really interested in the potential of photography. One, that the accessibility of this technology and the way that photos can be a tool in which everyday people had access to, and they can document themselves. They can document their lives and create their own archives. They can historicize themselves in a sense. But as I sifted through family photos, I began to doubt the ability of the photograph to represent. I also began to notice certain problematics began to surface for me. So I began to be more interested in absence rather than presence, what the photos did not reveal in relationship to what was represented. So I'm going to flip through some of that early work, and I'm going to read a text from my MFA thesis. And this series was called Mi Casa es Su Casa, My House is Your House. The notion of the photograph as a visual text that can be read and analyzed along with the understanding of the family photograph as a form of self-representation were guiding ideas as I viewed my own family photos. Thumbing through countless images of birthday parties, weddings, baptisms, and anniversaries, I became aware of the patterns in the photos. These images were often taken during special occasions in which we wore our nicest clothes and carefully posed for the camera. In camera lucida, Darius Roland Barthes observes, now once I feel myself observed by the lens, everything changes. I constitute myself in the process of posing. I instantaneously make another body of myself. I transform myself in advance into an image. The family photos were fabrications. We posed and turned ourselves into images. In those old photos, I saw the other body we collectively created. The level of conformity struck me. We turned ourselves into the archetype of the family, which we had seen in a million versions of in mass culture. I was struck by the vast distance between the constructed image within the photos and my personal knowledge of what we had lived. The photos were a surface, a recording of the face we put on, that masked a much more complex world that lay underneath. African writer, revolutionary theorist, Frantz Fanon writes, the colonized is elevated above his jungle status in proportion to his adoption of the mother country's cultural standards. He becomes whiter as he renounces his blackness, his jungle. I was struck by how we began to imitate the image of what a family was supposed to look like. The facade bothered me because with historic insight, I knew what brewed beneath my parents' self-consciousness of their, quote, Mexicanness when we entered non-Mexican parts of town. My father's anger, the economic tensions, what these images sought to erase. I reflected on what was absent as much as what was present. I wanted to undo the photo. Those figures dressed in starched Sunday shirts did not tell me of the present, nor did they speak accurately of the past. I desired to deconstruct the photo to uncover what brewed beneath those perfect lawns and the sensuous curve of those old new Chevys. They told me of something that never truly existed, the way it appeared. They did not tell what lurked beneath those perfect lawns and stiff taffeta. The body of work was about identifying and studying cultural myths embedded in the visual iconography of home and family through strategies of deconstructing. I was interested in deconstruction as a tool for decolonization. By dismantling these archetypes, could we kill the cop in our head? could we free ourselves from colonialist ideologies? In search for alternative modes of representation, I began seeking strategies towards creating what some U.S. third world feminist critical theorists propound as, quote, a new subjectivity, a political revision that denies any one ideology as the final answer, instead positing a tactical subjectivity with the capacity to recenter depending on the kinds of oppression to be confronted. Here's an installation view of this work, which actually is being exhibited in LA right now, a show called This Is Not a Self-Portrait. And then I also wanted to undo the fixed nature of the photo, and I wanted to create images that moved and approach portraiture as something that was fluid, something that was constantly in shift. So I began doing these installations, where through that void of the silhouetted figure, I back project video. So I think I have to speed up. So around this time too, I founded a project that I continue today called the Butcher Research Society. And I was interested in pursuing the theoretical questions I was exploring in my photo-based work, along with the direct action strategies I was doing in my activist work. I was part of I co-founded an art collective called Arts in Action that came together during the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles in 2000. We functioned and worked together for 4 years. So I began with the Butcher Research Society, and I began doing these guerrilla actions. Oops. In which I would make my own historic plaques, and created my own pseudo-historic society and began inserting them through guerrilla tactics in public space. So actually, this is a view of one of my plaques you see on the top right, and it's overlooking Dodger Stadium, a site in which a community called Chavez Ravine was built in the 1950s. Well, was displaced in the 1950s. So actually, I'll come back to this reference to Chavez Ravine in a bit. I was interested in questioning the meta-narratives erected in, or hegemonic beliefs erected in public monuments, as approaching history as a space where the hegemony was produced. On one level, I wanted to problematize official monuments and official histories, but I also wanted to activate public space. I wanted to work outside of a gallery space. And at the same time, these actions happened at a period in which space in LA was becoming increasingly controlled and surveilled. So for me, it was just a psychological exercise to kind of undo the psychology of fear that I myself was internalizing about acting in public space. So from these guerrilla actions, actually, some of the work of the Butcher Research Society has entered museum spaces. So I'm going to actually show you a little bit of a video for a show I was invited to be in. The first show I was invited to be in a major museum show. It was called Phantom Sightings Art After the Chicano Movement. So a big challenge for me with this work was how to bring my guerrilla tactics or the work of the Butcher Research Society into a museum context. So I'm going to show you part of a video, and the idea of Fort Moore Living Monument was to, I approached that show by creating a decoy museum within the actual show itself. So this decoy museum explored the history of a monument near downtown LA called Fort Moore, which is dedicated to Mormon troops who built a fort there during the Mexican-American War. So so I had an actual room within the exhibition, and it looked like a gallery space with artifacts related to this monument. And this video was also projected in that room. Strategies to conceptually and visually destabilize and complicate the official narrative of the monument itself. So this is a mosaic fountain that actually has been turned off since our drought in 1978. It was a water fountain, and was never turned on again. So I began to try to complicate the official narrative, one by investigating the history of the site itself. And one thing about LA is that it's a city whose image has been fabricated and exported around the world. And you know, the very distorted images of LA have been exposed. So everyone has like an image. When I travel and I tell people I'm from LA, everyone has an image of what LA is and what LA is like. And really, all you have to do is begin to scratch at the surface of those images, and they quickly disintegrate. And with this monument itself, from the beginning, as I began to investigate this monument, the official narrative quickly unraveled. This hill itself was a site of a lot of different histories. I learned that it was a site of lynchings. After the Mexican-American War, when LA became, and much of the Southwest became a part of the United States, there was a period that was very, very violent. There were a lot of lynchings of Mexican-Americans. So this place was a site of lynching. You could see that I kind of do the official narrative through video. And I began taking the official text and not changing any words, but just reordering the text. There are many layers to this space. It was the site of a cemetery at one time, and its remains reveal a very complicated history of LA. There's an article I found in the LA Times dated 1934 in which a supposed an engineer was drilling into the hill and found a whole underground network of tunnels and spaces where an old ancient race of lizard people lived. And that was a real artifact. And I also began to invent or create fictional artifacts. And I wasn't so interested in fictionalizing history, but also exploring the fictions in history. In creating my own artifacts, I created artifacts that were based on the history I had found and excavated, and began to be objects which imagined a vanquished history. A lot of history is written and recorded by what can be documented or what is found. We never write history by what has been destroyed. It's hard to write history with the artifacts that don't exist. So I began to imagine what those artifacts might look like. Continue with photography. This is a series of photos called Stoner Spots, and they're all spaces which youth inhabit, and a certain architecture, I guess, gets built over time through those occupations. This is Turnbull Canyon, famous for its wing. Stoner Stadium. Here's a piece in 2010, I was invited to Cairo to participate in an exhibit. I was really missing craft in my work. I felt like my work had been really become too heady, too research-based, and I was missing the visceral aspect of art making in my work. And I was also, this was soon after my mother's death, so I also felt kind of paralyzed and kind of shut down. So the idea of the lock and unlocking where I was at became a starting point for our project. So I learned the craft of, I proposed the idea for my piece, not knowing anything about lock picking. So I was totally set myself up for a situation of do or die. You know, either succeed to figure it out or fail miserably. And I learned how to pick locks. Great experience, great skill. And I got to go to Cairo, and this was 3 months before the revolution, or uprising, whatever we want to call it. And I created a lock-picking table, and I unpicked locks and taught people how to unpick locks in exchange for a conversation of what they would do with such a tool. Okay, here's the installation view. So I was also interested in space use in the city, and I've always been interested in the way we live in the city and how we use space, and rethinking that. At this time, space in LA was just becoming increasingly more expensive, less accessible, and I began noticing all these abandoned lots. I taught this to a number of people, and I also did an intervention in which I unlocked an empty lot and declared it open for public access. In 2010, a project I had been involved in culminated in a solo exhibit at the LA County Museum of Art. This was part of a larger citywide series of exhibitions that focused on LA history. And I was invited to do a project on any aspect of Chicano art production in LA from 45 to 80 that I desired. I chose to work on focus on murals produced in the 1970s. So I chose to focus on that for a number of reasons. One, because literally that history was being erased. I don't know how many of y'all know, but there was an incredible moment in time in the 1970s when there's a huge proliferation of mural making, not just by Chicanos, but in East LA, particularly, like hundreds of murals were painted. LA was described as the mural capital of the United States, if not the world at that time. I'm not sure about the claims of the world, but that was my insurance use. And now that history was literally fading, being buffed out as the city was fighting its graffiti wars with youth. So this is a mural, one of the first women's themed, Chicana-themed murals painted. This was at a housing project near our county hospital, LA General Hospital. Here's one mural, definitely whitewashed, and you can see a fragment of it surfacing. But I didn't want to just kind of repeat what had been written about how Chicano murals had been historicized. I had met a neighbor who was, I'd call it organic archivist. And in the 70s, she documented every instance of Chicano murals she could find. Her archive of over 500 slides had just been sitting in her house for a few decades. And sifting through her archive, I was I was, it expanded my idea of what Chicano art is. I realized that what had been written about, and I teach Chicano art, so I've written a lot of what has been written about in terms of Chicano murals. But actually her archive defied the history that had been written. And I definitely saw images I was familiar with, revolutionary heroes, images of Chicanos, monumental, bigger than life, beautiful Chicano culture being celebrated. But I think one thing that really struck me was I was so much interested in the revolutionary, which I was familiar with, but also what about the Chicano hippie poet? So I began to notice, my first step was just spending time with the archive and reading the archive. And I began to notice all these psychedelic moments, and that really intrigued me. And that was my starting point. So I would find some small details became more interesting to me. So I began to sample small details, the details that the murals weren't about, and sample those, blow them up, and remix them. So here's a third eye, the cosmic third eye, and remix them into these light boxes. And here's a detail of that. Here's an installation view. This also included a video installation that kind of was the centerpiece of the work, which I'll show you in a bit. And actually, I'm going to flip through. I was also interested in creating another frame in which to see this history, and a frame that looked at mural production in relationship to the landscape, in relationship to the city, the architecture of the city. One of the central epicenters of Chicano muralism was a housing project called Estrada Courts, which actually was built from plans that were used for temporary housing for military barracks in World War II. So if you look at military barracks in 1945, it's the same architecture. And I began to be interested in how, in looking at these murals through the context, in relationship to the architecture in which it adorned. I began to see these murals as an effort also to literally transform the architecture. So here's some of those psychedelic moments. Became really interested in also the kind of 70s graphic style and approaches. Show that. This was a mural actually painted by my brother in the early 70s when he came back from cycling in Mexico as a hippie traveler for 2 years, and he returned a muralist. He was never an artist before then, so I don't know what happened in Mexico. Now this one is the Chicana metamorphosis. Of course, you have to have your references to Carlos Castañeda, Separate Reality. If you don't know what that reference means, definitely recommend checking it out. There's these kind of interesting, fantastic images. Cosmic Aslan. Again, that graphic style. I was also interested in the mural as a social site, a site for social organizing. So not so much what was painted, but what happened in the painting, who participated, and what change and transformation happened through that. And the mural, for some reason, many muralists had stories about being policed and being harassed for painting murals, even though they were permitted, even though they were working with different organizations. So actually, this is a piece in which youth were attacked while painting a mural by police. And ironically, over a decade and a half afterwards, as youth from the same neighborhood were restoring that mural, again, they were harassed by police. So what was so threatening about mural painting? And I came up with this term of the social sublime, which the mural became a space that allowed people, in this case, like urban Latino youth, to act outside of the rules expected of them. And they became other selves. They discovered other selves and other possibilities, and that was threatening for some. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to show my action portraits. But I do want to talk a little bit about what I'm doing now.
Sandra, you're getting upsetting looks about saying you're running out of time. Go for 15 minutes more so. We just want to make sure we have one question here.
All right.
Present your work for 15 moments or so.
Okay, here's the installation, a video installation. These are called action portraits. And I asked 5 young muralists, young artists who paint murals, to paint themselves. And I asked muralists who I felt had a direct connection with the muralism of the 1970s. So they are literally painting themselves with the archive of Chicano murals from the 1970s. And all of these artists are self-taught artists. None of them went to school. Literally, like Raul and Fabian talk about how art literally saved their lives. I was helping my brother paint a mural in the early 90s, and Raul talks about meeting my brother at that time, and he was a homeless youth at that time. Very important idea or thing I think committed to in my work is this idea of agency, of how we can be critical thinkers, and also that critical consciousness can inform our actions. And through our actions, we can invent ourselves, we can create ourselves, and also we can impact the landscapes in which we reside. We have agency to shape the landscapes in which we reside. So a quick preview of what I'm doing now. I'm beginning a new body of work called To Oblivion. And To Oblivion refers to a banner that was on a train. LA used to have an extensive public transportation system, and it was dismantled beginning in the 40s, finished in the 50s. And one of those trains on its last ride carried a banner that said To Oblivion. So I'm looking at LA's transportation history. I'm on one level researching the building of the first public transportation system that was dismantled, as I'm looking at a new public transportation industry being built now. So ironically, LA is spending billions of dollars to rebuild the transportation infrastructure it dismantled over half a century ago. So this is the map, well, the map of that today. This is what that transportation system looked like in 1910. While I'm doing that, I'm interested in working in doing archival work as well and finding ways to activate archival material. I'm also doing performative work trying to insert this history into public space as well as video work. But I'm also participating and documenting and observing local efforts to prevent what we call transit-oriented displacement or development, in which working class communities in the building of LA, and this is a kind of continued story, working class communities get displaced. So I'm looking at the efforts of working class communities to organize and root themselves in the city. So I'm going to share just some of those efforts to give you a quick little snapshot of some things that are going on in LA. So actually, this is a space called, it's a native garden with native California plants. And an amazing organizer named Olivia Chumacero is organizing, was the caretaker of this space, and she helped bring in local Tongva, which are indigenous people of this area. This was a sacred site for them, and they've been able to use this site ceremonially. They have not had access to that site for over 200 years. And we as caretakers of this garden also learn the native uses of these plants and also the healing properties of these plants. Here's some documentation of an ancestor ceremony she held in November, and she invited different communities to build their altar and share their ceremonial practices. She is Tarahumaren from northern Mexico, so this is that ceremony in the process of just this altar space kind of being built. You could see this circle of marigolds surrounding it. And actually the Tongva came in and shared their ceremony, which was a dolphin ceremony. They built these amazing dolphin sand sculptures. This was, and you could see some of the dolphin sand sculptures here. Olivia is Tarahumaren, so she shared her ceremonies. A Mayan community was also brought in, invited to participate, and they built this space and performed their ceremony. And also this happened after the hurricane in the Philippines, and a Filipino community built this altar space and shared their. Fortunately, this garden is being bulldozed right now. Literally, it was bulldozed last week because there's going to be a redesign of the park. And of course, I got to sneak in images of my garden. This is summer. This is not spring. We do have a winter in LA. Here's a quick slideshow of another group I met, many who are participants in Everything is Medicine. This is a group organizing against an injunction in the neighborhood that I live right on the borderline of, called Echo Park, which is experiencing intense gentrification. Working class communities are being pushed out. They're passing a gang injunction at a moment in time in which gang activity is at its lowest point for 2 decades. But this is a document of a bike ride against the injunction through Echo Park by just really inspiring activists. I think during this period of just trying to rebuild my foundations after 2 major deaths, I think one of the gifts has been to just meet this whole new generation of artists, activists, organizers, environmentalists, to learn from, be inspired, and to be learning from younger people. with you a piece I wrote after my brother's death. July 28, 2013. I'm trying to move. The void of Alex's absence, like a black hole, pulls at me, sucking in energy. My body feels like lead, heavy, obtuse. I gotta push through it. I can't give it into it. It's an early morning. I head to my dad's house to do a load of wash and take a morning walk. I drive up the house of my youth. My parents were the second Mexican family to arrive on the block in this small, primarily Italian and Russian neighborhood in Northeast LA during the early 60s. Eminent domain had claimed their previous house. They arrived to El Sereno, a young couple with 2 boys, as a construction crew poured black asphalt over the foundation of their old house in Frogtown. As they moved in, the whites moved out. The merging post-war freeway system provided an infrastructure that facilitated their move to the suburbs. By the time I was born, the neighborhood would be 90% Mexican-American. White flight to the newly built suburbs left a sprinkling of elderly whites in the neighborhood. After putting in my load of wash, I begin my walk. I turn right onto the sidewalk. I notice a young 30-something white couple walking their dog. Sparkling sneakers, a trim goatee, stiff new walking shirts, obviously new to the new neighborhood, I know. I nod to them as I turn up Rowan, filing a quick snapshot of this image into my, quote, signs of gentrification, El Sereno, unquote, mental file. I relax into a morning stride, enjoying the crispness of the morning air while noting the intensity of this early Southern Californian summer sun. I walk up Rowan, past Yellowstone, and take in the landscape, allowing the memory of places, houses, childhood friends to unravel. I remember the Lauras, the Gonzales, the Oronas, the Garzas. I remember the dead and wonder where the living are now. During the 1990s, Asian and Latino immigrants had begun to move into the neighborhood as the crack epidemic and gang violence, both in its myth and reality, made the neighborhood undesirable but affordable. During the mid-2000s, urban development projects and a speculative housing market made downtown LA and its neighboring communities, including my own, more desirable to young professionals. For the first time, I began to see people with more money than us moving into the neighborhood. I noted that my own family was in a parallel position to those of the aging Russian and Italian families that I knew as a child. My dad was now the elder resident who lived in his house with his memories as newer residents transformed the face of the neighborhood. I turn into Ascot Hills, a newly opened park nestled in one of many soft rolling hills that dot El Sereno. I walk up the landscape path filled with sages, deergrass, datura, California native flowers. For decades, these hills had been closed to residents and accessed mostly by teens who jumped its fences and enjoyed the secret hideout. I wondered how the wild rabbits and the coyotes were doing now that the hill had been opened. I climb a path following the immense but soft contours of the hill. As I continue to climb, I take in the dry yellowness of the chaparral and its contrast to the cooler grayness of the downtown landscape. I felt a great sense of openness. I realized I've arrived to a spot with a 360-degree view of the neighborhood and the city. I remember the first time I had taken this walk over 20 years ago. I'd come back to LA feeling raw, bruised, beaten, moving between the ivory towers of Berkeley to studies and travel in Mexico, Central America, Cuba, had stretched me, expanded me, turned me inside out, in every possible direction. By the time I had come back home, everything I had known looked foreign to me. I had lost my grounding. The hills had pulled me in like a magnet on that first encounter. I lived near these hills most of my life, but never noticed them. As an urban child, the energy of the streets excited me, not the stillness and quiet of the hills. I hopped the fence, and when I landed on the other side, I found my gaze locked with a coyote that stood 50 feet away. She had 2 pups standing near me. Our muscles tense and defensive, our gazes fixed on each other. I took a step back, nodding and acknowledging through my eyes that I knew I was on her land, in her territory. With that gesture, she softened and trotted off. She sensed I was not a threat and granted me permission to enter. I followed an old road up the hill. I soon found myself on the summit that provided a panoramic view of Sereno. I located my parents' house, spotted my elementary school, my junior high, high school, El Sereno Park. I could see the geography of much of my life from that viewpoint. I was seeing home, my past, my history, through a vantage point I'd never seen before, one that paralleled where I was at in life. My education travels had taken me from home, changed me, made me feel like a stranger, but had brought me back and allowed me to find something that was always there, but I was never aware of. I felt comforted by the oldness and wisdom of the hill, a witness to all the ships below, its memory more vast than I could imagine. I found a different place to situate myself within my home. I was not a stranger. Standing at the same spot 20 years later, I remember this epiphany. I drink in the view, take in the immensity of the moment. I begin to turn my gaze, and with it, my body. I slowly pan the landscape. My gaze begins to move faster. I spread my arms. The hills, the urban grid, the skyline below, a whirling blur. A 360-degree moving panorama. I register glimpses of known places, both past and present. Hillside, downtown, City Terrace, Elysian Park, Silver Lake, where I now reside. In that dizzying euphoria, I'm aware of the places that I can't see, that go beyond my view. The desert, Angeles Crest Forest, New Mexico, Mexico, the Bay Area, the places that are a part of me and have transformed me. As I spin, my arms feel like tappies, stretching, lengthening. My legs and feet grow like roots reaching deeper into the earth. I am of and beyond this home. I have arrived. Thank you.
Yeah, let's reserve about 10 minutes for questions, then people can have 15 minutes to come up and talk to their individually. All right, folks.
Only once in 8th grade for selling pop.
You said that you felt like you've been given this new gift from young people, from young artists and activists. I wonder if you could talk more about that. What is it you feel like they're giving you?
One, just optimism. I'd say two, also I think they're just so much healthier. I just see this kind of upcoming generation a lot healthier than my generation. You know, just in relationship to their bodies. I think also incorporating and making healing a part of their activism. So just being better at taking care of themselves, you know, and like there was after like Trayvon Martin was killed, there was like a march around LA by some young people of color activists. And after that march, like one person is part of that community. She's turned her garage into a healing space, and they went home and kind of meditated and reflected on, like, shared their pain on that journey. So creating that space for themselves, that's really inspiring. And then also just, I think the Rite of the Injunction kind of really shows this generation really interested in questioning but rooting themselves in the lesson. Question in the back?
You talked about going to Mexico for the first time and how much of an influence it was for you. Have you ever been back there since?
Oh yeah, I've been going back for ever since, in the 90s, I was going back almost every year, the 2000s. When I was in grad school, I I went to Mexico and was in dialogue with a lot of contemporary artists, checking out what was going on there. Because I felt there was practices going on there and dialogue there that I just couldn't get here in the States. So it was challenging me in a way, you know, that I just wasn't being challenged in the United States. Yeah, so Mexico continued to feed me in a lot of, many, many different ways. That's a whole other topic. Any other questions? Uh-huh.
I was wondering if you could just describe a little more this idea of agency. I haven't heard the word used in this context before, but I'm very interested in sort of the brief description you gave there.
Yeah, that's, well, I think maybe it's Foucault who uses this word of like docile bodies and being passive receptors of knowledge and information, how we can be active receivers of information, and being critical thinkers. And also agency is our potential to act. That critical consciousness informing our ability to act and our actions. And through that, creating and gaining a certain type of power. Question?
Can you talk a little bit more about your folk? You looked at murals for their kind of the iconography in the murals themselves, the little details that spoke about the time and place that weren't represented in the mainstream history. Can you speak more about what you found in that folk iconography and how you then took those things and turned them into kind of mainstream history, or in your work at least?
Well, a lot of Chicano murals have been written about the overtly political imagery, or imagery that relates to overtly relates to Chicano identity. But so I think what I found was I also began to notice I'd be interested in the aesthetic strategies. So definitely I began to notice this kind of 70s graphic style, many of the murals. And then I learned that in interviewing some of these muralists, that many of them were being trained in community colleges and graphic art programs at that time. And at that time, a super graphic style was being used, so they incorporated that into their murals. Another thing I was really interested in was environmentally themed murals. So I wrote a catalog essay, and it's in a catalog called LA Chicano, and I talk about the environmentally themed murals. And in interviewing muralists, I became interested in other politics embedded in Chicano muralism. I think there's a kind of narrow version of what Chicano politics were, but I think in looking at the murals and looking at the record of what was actually painted, there are many politics, as recorded in that inspired those murals. And so I think my work was kind of first gesture to name those other politics. So definitely very interested in environmentally themed murals, especially at a moment in time in LA right now where people are really organizing around environmental justice issues. Other questions?